Great. Okay, so for today's presentation, we are going to be talking about the path for publication, a general view on journal and conference papers. Presenting for you today is Thais, Thais is a PhD student in civil engineering, as she said, but she is also a reviewer of 4 top-ranked journals in significant publishers, so Elsevier and Springer, and she has over 50 citations up to nowadays, with her 5 journals and 5 conference publications, with more papers on the way. Myself, I'm Davi, PhD student in atmospheric sciences. Recently, I won the Vanier Scholarship, which is the most prestigious Canadian scholarship at the doctoral level. And I have about 14 citations in my 5 journal and 5 conference publications. We are also co-creators of 2 social media guests. One is the PhD Instagram page, which is also on Facebook with the same name. We have over 230 posts about the academic life, publications, and more. And we also have over 4,300 followers there. And we have a page on Udemy where we share courses. The one that we have there now, it's about literature review, and it has a great evaluation, and over 30 students all over the globe had attended this course, and the reviews are pretty good. So feel free to check that out. I'm gonna send you a link later on in this presentation as well. Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, and about the presentation today, we were hoping to go over like a 30-40 minutes talk about some subjects that we find most important to address about the publication process. And then if there is time and people are interested, we can go to a 30 to 20 minutes Q&A session. The presentation outlines go from why publish, timeline of a generic publication, types of publication, the submission process for journals and conferences, cover letter, insights from a reviewer, in this case, Thais, and we're going to talk about the point-by-point response as well. Okay, so let's start with the why. Why do we publish? First of all, the potential of a researcher is often based in 3 things. So that's usually how you get evaluated when you are in the academia. First one is the number of citations. Second, you have number of publications, and you also, of course, can count on reference letters from your supervisors or people that you have worked with. Now, while the reference letters are based on your personal and professional skills, the number of citations is impartial but not absolute metric that's often used to recruitment in academia, especially after the PhD, scholarship applications as well, progress tracking by interested parties, and it may vary with time and field of study, depending if you are publishing something that is new, and then you're gonna gain those citations after, or if you are publishing something that is like very well known, but in the same way people do a lot of research on this particular topic, you also might gain a lot of citations early on. Now, one can increase their number of citations, of course, by publishing more and advertising their research, but you don't necessarily need to publish as first author all the time. If you get involved into more research projects, you get the chance to publish as co-authors, and that's also going to count for your citations, the overall number of citations that you have. And if you publish innovative ideas or methods, that usually gets a lot of attention with time. So let's say there is a new technology that you explored and you're the first person to publish about it. Eventually, when that technology becomes mainstream, you are going to be the person that other researchers are going to be referenced to when they are talking about such technology. But we cannot forget that it also brings a certain satisfaction when you publish something, when you publish a paper. So, of course, on a personal aspect, it is very satisfying to see the results of your intense work being advertised. And publishing, all in all, is how we as a scientist contribute to a better world. Now, in terms of the timeline of a generic journal publication, the one that you are seeing here on the screen is more or less how it goes. Often you start writing your paper once you have the results from your research, or once you finish the review process if you are writing a literature review. And you draft like the first outline, and within 2 months, you are sending this first draft to your supervisor. That draft is going to be reviewed by your supervisor and co-authors. And around 3 to 4 months from the starting point, it's usually when you submit to a journal, assuming that everything goes well. Now, once the paper is with the journal, it can take a long time between that submission and they replying to you with major or minor reviews. Unless you get like a desk rejection, which we're gonna talk about later, then that is like usually a week that you get the response. But if you don't get a desk rejection, then it's gonna take to the reviewers, and that may take 6 to 12 months from all the way back to when you get your results.
Let me just jump in. If you get to the reviewers, if you don't get a desk review rejection, it doesn't mean that you're not gonna get it rejected. And these dates that we're putting here, they should be criticized by you and whoever's watching this, because this is not a guarantee. Not all papers are gonna go like this. Some are way faster than this. Some journals are way faster. Sometimes your paper is really well made and the process is not gonna take that long. But sometimes it takes even more time than we are putting here. So just be mindful of that as well.
Yeah, we had cases where this review process took 3 months, which is a fair time, it's a good time. And we had colleagues that went through this and had to wait a year to get back from the reviewers. So that might vary a lot. But again, once you have the reviews back, you have to go through this point-by-point review. So that's something that you do to prepare to enhance, I would say, your paper before it gets submitted again to the journal. We're going to go over that in this presentation today as well. And again, assuming that everything goes well, the paper is going to get accepted. And it may go through this review round again, that sometimes happens. So after the reviews and you send the paper back, the reviewers ask you to do more things. That can happen again. But if it doesn't, and everything goes well, the paper is going to get accepted, but it is going to be published only a few weeks to a few months after that. So this whole process, from the day you have your results to the day your paper gets published, in the best, I guess, scenario, it's going to take a year or a year and a half. So this is something that you have to keep in mind. It's not going to be, usually it's not going to be so fast. And one thing that we advise you is to not stop your academic life while you wait for the next step, or you wait for the next stage. So after you submit a paper to a journal, forget about the paper and start doing something else. That way you can keep up with your work as you wait for other people to assess your first submission. An extra tip, and this is actually a very good one, is to look out for the publication history of recent articles in the journal that you wish to submit your work. So in this case, this is the publication history of my first PhD paper, a review paper. As you can see on the side here, the left side, the publication history, the paper was received by the journal on September of 2021, but it was only published in March of this year. And it took all this time to go over the review process and submit to the journal again, then get the paper prepared by the journal so it can eventually be published. So if you go to the journals that you want to publish and you search the papers, the most recent papers, and go to this publication history, you're going to have an idea of how long it actually takes to publish a paper. And the journals often have that information as well, but the issue is that that information also counts desk rejections. So what might happen is that you see that a journal takes like 10 weeks to get your paper ready, but when you submit and you go to the whole process, it actually took 20 weeks, like the double. So the best way for you to know it's, I believe, is this one that you're seeing on the screen right here.
Another important point is knowing how long the process is taking for other authors is an indication for you if you need to have that paper published for your program, for your degree, or if you are doing a review paper. Review papers get old very quickly. So you don't want to submit your review paper to a journal that will take a year to review it, because then you have to include new papers into your paper, and then it becomes a lot of work, have to redo all figures, all graphs and everything. So be mindful of that in your selection. Don't just go for the impact factor of the journals.
Yeah. Now, when we talk about a conference publication, this timeline is a little bit different in a way that things happen much faster. So essentially you have this first event, which is when the conference announced the call for papers. And ever since that announcement, you prepare the stuff, you prepare the documents for the conference in the same way. So you have like a first outline, the first abstract delivered to your supervisor, then that goes to the review process, and then you submit the abstract, it gets accepted, they have a review, and then goes to the conference. But notice that the timeline for all this to happen is usually shorter than 6 months. And then once the conference is over and after a long time, it's when the paper actually gets published in the conference annals. So that's pretty much how it goes for conference papers. Now, the tips that we have for you in terms of conference publications is first, to always have a backup abstract to submit to a conference, because sometimes the conference appears out of nowhere. It's a fellow researcher, a colleague, your supervisor heard about it and send it to you, and then all of a sudden you have to prepare an abstract. So keep in mind to always have an abstract as a backup. You can also think about 2 or 3 conferences you want to participate in that year and keep track of them, and ask your supervisor to name a few conferences your group always goes to. That usually gets you prepared for any conference that you might attend in that particular year. Great. So far we have addressed the types of publication, the main types of publication, or the main pathways for publication when you're doing your PhD, your master's, or even as an undergrad. Now, in terms of journal publications, what we see being published more is the review papers. And the review paper can be either systematic or non-systematic, and we go over there that particular difference in our course. So we suggest you again to check out. And for the research paper, usually has like a very fixed structure. Usually it's like introduction, methods, results, discussion, and conclusion. Now for the conference, there are mainly three types of documents, of publications. One is just the abstract, which is a one-page long document. You have a conference paper, which is published in the conference proceedings. And you have conference posters that gives you something cool to hang in your office or at your house after the conference is over.
About the review papers, although we do have very good non-systematic review papers published in the literature, I had the honor to review many of those. However, the journals nowadays, they are searching for systematic. So keep that in mind. It might be different for your specific field of study, but keep that in mind and make sure that you select the right methodology before you start, because doing that after you have your paper is a nightmare. You have to rewrite everything. You have to go back to the papers you selected. You have to redo your results and analysis. So keep that in mind. The systematic review came from the medical field, and now it's migrating for engineering, social studies, education, and all other fields. So make sure you know before you start.
Great. And I guess the final thing for this particular section, it's a tip that we have, and we give this tip also in our Instagram page, is that you do not actually need results or data to publish a paper. And this is in fact our most popular post with more than 100,000 views, 2,000 likes, 200 shares, and over 3,000 saves. Supervisors don't talk a lot about this, but you can actually publish a review paper from your review chapter. You can publish a methods paper from your methodology chapter. You can actually publish a commentary paper. So this is usually a letter to an author or an editor. That commentary paper often comes from people that are already established in the academia, but that's mostly for engineering and the medical sciences as well. The health sciences might be different from other fields of study. And of course, you can always publish as a co-author, so offering your expertise to a colleague. So keep that in mind. You don't actually need results data to publish a paper. There are other ways to publish without this.
Don't forget that publishing as a co-author will exercise other skills as well. It's not only about writing, it's about being able to communicate with your partners, being able to communicate with your colleagues, and to make sure that you have the best possible outcome after you both or multiple people work in one project.
Pretty much. So now I'm gonna move this, pass this to Thais. She's gonna continue the presentation and talk about the submission process and give her insights as a reviewer.
So let's talk a little bit more about journal papers. So the submission process for a journal paper starts with the documents preparation. And mind you, we are talking documents in plural. It's not only the manuscript. You have to conduct multiple documents when you're doing your submission. The second step is the submission itself. Then the paper goes through the evaluation of the editor. It might go to the reviewers, it might not, it might be rejected by the editor or accepted by the editor, although being accepted by the editor is a very rare occasion. And I only know of one person that done this in their lifetimes in our study. And he was a very outstanding researcher. So yeah, and then you go to the decision. About the submission process, it's important that all students understand these curiosities, because we have certain expectations when we submit that might not be reached. The first one is the reviewers might not be specialized on your field. And this is due because the reviewers are assigned by keywords, and keywords are not very specific. For instance, one of my keywords is water. And water could be water in the watershed. It could also be urban water. In my case, I work with urban water, so I wouldn't be able to provide as much insight in a watershed publication as I would in an urban water publication. So of course, the reviewer has to be ethical and try to help when he can or she can, or they. But it's important for you to know as well that the reviewer might not be specialized in your field due to that problem of the keywords. It also might be that you're just doing something that is completely novel. And the second point is you might get different reviewers in each review round. And this will make your life way harder than it should be, to be completely honest. So for instance, in the first review, you get 2 reviewers. They will say, do X, Y, and Z. And then you get 2 other reviewers and they will say the complete opposite. They will give more insight. They will give major revisions again. And then the review process will be extended by that. Another very important point is that the editor makes the final decision, but this decision is usually informed by what the reviewers say. So typically they go with the most restrictive or the worst outcome. So let's say you have 5 reviewers, 4 said that your paper is wonderful, it's just minor touches, minor reviews, and then you can be accepted. And there's 1 that suggested major reviews. The editor will most likely go with major reviews. Another very important point is that you can, in some journals, indicate the reviewers. So you can both indicate in favor or against reviewers, but it's important that you provide some type of justification for the reviewers you don't want. Maybe they are publishing in very similar area, maybe they publish something, maybe you critique their work in your work. So it's important that you also let the editor know about those things. And the 5th one is, if you get a rejection and you feel like it's really unfair, you might be able to reverse it. Mind you, this is not typical. Usually the editors will not even answer your email. So what I typically do, and I typically advise the students that reach me, is take your time, don't respond in the day you got the rejection letter. Actually write a point-by-point response for the rejection and then send that to the editor. And we are going to talk about the point-by-point in a few slides. So once again, the submission process requires multiple documents. It's not just the paper, right? So the first document is the manuscript, the paper, what you wrote throughout your research. The second one, and you might have those, you might not have those, you might include the supplemental materials in just one big document as a manuscript. So it's not mandatory, but it's often there, especially in my field. And the third one is the cover letter. And the cover letter is not mandatory in most journals, but the cover letter is an opportunity for the author. So the cover letter is a letter to the editor. The reviewers do not have access to your cover letter. So this is your chance to talk to the editor and convince them that your research has a contribution. It's not enough to have a good work. You have to advertise it. It's not enough to have a novel study. You have to show that you have a novel study. And make sure you have that information not only in a cover letter, but also in a manuscript. Another very important point, the editor, again, he might not be specialized in your field. Maybe you should explain a little bit of your work or explain it in an easier way to follow. So it's an opportunity to explain your research to people that are not familiar with your field specifically, especially if you're doing something that is completely novel. It's also the time to disclose any previous publications. This is really important Okay, so oftentimes what we do is we prepare a paper, we send it to a conference, we present it, we improve it, and then we send it to a journal. This is very common for many students. If you publish something in a conference, if you have it on your dissertation, if you have it published before the journal, even if it's not a complete paper, if it's just some extracts, you have to disclose that. And the editor will decide if they want to consider it. Not only you have to disclose it, you also have to justify why you're publishing this again, right? If you already published it, it's already out there. I don't need to publish it again. A good justification, especially in this case that you did conference and then journal, is to talk about how the journal will have a bigger audience and will let your paper to be viewed by more people than the conference would. Another good response would be, we worked on this paper, it's not the same anymore, we included analysis, we included discussion, so it's way better than what we previously published. But it's important that you always have that information on your cover letter. And this is the first thing the editor will read. So it's really important that's well made, formal, and well prepared. So for the structure of the cover letter, once again, it's not mandatory, but I think it's a great opportunity for all authors. The first thing you do is you identify your paper. And when you're writing your cover letter, you are not going to have the number, most likely, unless you're doing the cover letter for the resubmission process. So just the title and authors is fine. Then you're going to write, what is the contribution of your paper? What are you adding to the literature? Why is your paper important? Why does it deserve to be published? Then you're gonna put why your paper deserves to be published in that specific journal. And it's a very tricky part. And yes, that means that every cover letter for every resubmission you do is different. If your paper is rejected 9 times and you submit for 9 different journals, you write 9 cover letters. You don't need to change the first 2 topics, you just need to change why it fits within the specific journal. It's also important to disclose any conflicts of interest and any previous submissions, as I mentioned. And for the conflicts of interest, most journals will have a small space for you to disclose it. But what is important is they don't give you the opportunity to show how you manage that conflict of interest. Let's say your research was paid by a company and your results are very in favor of the company. How did you manage for the company not to interfere in the results? So you put that on a cover letter so the editor knows that you actually did the work. So here we have an example. This is a post from our page. With the entire cover letter, we have the identification on top. Then we have dear editors. You can address the editor themselves. You can be very specific with the name as well, or editors-in-chief if you want. And then you talk about your paper, you identify it, the title, and then you talk about how your paper is important, and again, why you fit within the goal and scope of the journal. Have you if you have the possibility, it's also nice to cite papers that they published that are similar to yours. So to recall a little bit of the review process, so you submit it. Sometimes there is an editorial office, but they are only going to look very simple mistakes. And if the quality is really bad, you might get rejected by the editorial office, but it's not very common. Then you're going to go to the editor. The editor either makes a decision or sends this to the reviewers and then goes back to the editor for the decision. Sometimes you're going to get more than 2 reviewers, and it's not very common that you would get just one, unless you're already in minor revisions and your paper is really good. So let's talk about the reasons for rejection, right? And here we're talking about desk rejection. So desk rejection is basically when the editor decides not to follow through with the review process of your paper and decides to reject it. So there are three main points for the rejection on the desk, because the editor will not take the time to go through your paper in a very detailed way. Typically, of course, they might, but it's not usual. So the first one is your paper is out of scope and it's not related to the journal. This is the main one. The second one is the quality of the paper is really bad and it doesn't fit with the quality of the journal, and you're not following paper guidelines. Typically, editors are not going to reject on guidelines because this is something you can change, right? But if it's a big mistake or the journal only accepts 8,000 words for the type of paper you're submitting and you submitted 12,000, you're probably going to get rejected for that. So, but the most important point is make sure you're choosing the journal right. So to make sure your paper is in the scope of the journal, you have to go through these 3 points. Have you cited this journal? Does this journal publishes in your field? If not, go for another one. Does your paper fit the journal specifications? And this is quite easy information to find. Most Elsevier and Springer will have it on the first page with the journal's aims and goals. So you go there and you check it out, read it through, and make sure it makes sense for you. After the review process, so now the editor let the reviewers have the paper. These are the 5 major points for getting a rejection. The first one is lack of novelty. And once again, I want to reinforce, it is not enough to have a novel paper if you don't write it. You have to let the reader know. The reader might not be someone that is as knowledgeable as you in your field. So you have to let them know why your paper is novel. So you can easily communicate that both in your abstract and your introduction. It should be right away. It should be something that's seen right away. It shouldn't be on your results. It shouldn't be on your discussion. It needs to be on your abstract and introduction. So the second point is your methodology is not replicable. So if it's just small details that you can implement and then improve, probably you're not going to get a rejection for that. But if the methodology is not replicable at all and there's no information available, you're probably going to get rejected by the reviewers. The third point is poor discussion, not enough sharing results of other people or contrasting or evaluating other results and basic results. So your results are very minor or very simple. That's also a reason for a rejection. And then we have poor quality, bad presentation, and poor writing. And these 3 are highly interconnected. And students often think that having good results is enough, and it's not. We are in a field that we have to communicate science, and a paper is communication. So if you don't do a good job communicating the science you made, it's not going to be accepted, and it will be perceived as a bad job. So be sure you are consulting this. And there are a bunch of books. We are going to send the links for some books. They're very interesting for writing and to improve your publication skills. And the 6th one, it's lack of luck. Maybe you just got a reviewer that was really tough on you. Maybe your reviewer did not understand your paper at all or did not make the effort to read through it with the quality it was required from them. It is important that you understand that sometimes your paper will be rejected and it will be unfair. So you have to move on and try to do your best in the next submission, if possible. So if your paper does not get rejected, you get an opportunity. The opportunity to revise your paper. You can get major revisions, which means a lot of changes, and usually goes from 1 to 3 months, or you can get minor revisions, which means very small details, and it goes from 1 to 3 weeks. One point that I want to emphasize, sometimes, and because I am a reviewer, I have seen this. Sometimes the reviewers will indicate major revisions just to give the authors more time. It's not always indicate a good indicative of the quality of your work itself. It might be that, well, next week's Christmas, I don't want to give this guy just 1 week to resend his paper, so I'm going to indicate major revisions and let the editor know. Or I'm just going to indicate to the editor, because there are 2 communications we make when we're doing a review, one for the author and one for the editor. I can also indicate to the editor that, well, give them more time, they will need it.
I can testify to that. One of my papers, actually, when I received the major revisions back, and I look at the revisions, there were 5 points only that I could address in a week. But even so, it got major revisions, and I had a month to do it, which I appreciated a lot, of course. But yeah, this might as well be your case too.
And show them that you did the work, because sometimes they will have questions, right? How can you modify in the manuscript the questions? You have to address those as well. The point-by-point document, it can be mandatory. The editor can request for that. Sometimes they don't. I do emphasize that students should do it anyways, because it makes the process way easier, way faster. As a reviewer, you go to your number, right? We don't provide a name to the people that are reviewing. So let's say I'm reviewer 2, I just go to reviewer 2 and I see if they address all my comments, and then I can provide insight over my own comments and not the entire thing. You're also able to address the comments you don't want to follow through. And this is very important. Not all revisions should be made. Some of them are not applicable. Some of them will not be possible, or they are just not for your work or out of scope, or they're just suggestions that don't make any sense. It might happen. So you have to address those as well in a respectful way, hopefully, and make sure that you're providing reasoning. For example, in one of my papers, the reviewer indicated that I should remove a section, but that section is very important for my field. It was one of the most important sessions on my paper. So I provided reasoning, and I also provided other papers that were already published that did the same. So provide reasoning, and if you can, back it up with the literature. Another very important point is it increases the reviewer's understanding of methodological choices, and it helps you to organize your line of thought. There are 2 types of answer in a point-by-point. The first one is 2 types of question, sorry. So the first one is a clarification question. So the reviewer is not very clear of what you're doing, or they want to clarify a point or 2. So you answer the question and you try to clarify that point in your text as well, in your manuscript. If it is the case that you feel like they didn't read it through well enough, just indicate the sections in your paper that are showing the clarity for their questions. It might be that they just didn't have the time to go through it properly. But typically try to change something, because if they have a question, it might be that your paper is a little bit unclear on that point. And the second one is a modification request. And in this case, you either have to modify the manuscript or justify why you're not doing it. And you have to justify everything in a point-by-point, just to make sure that your paper is gonna be accepted. So to do the point-by-point response, you start with the paper identification. And by now, because you already passed through the process of review, you probably have a paper number. You have to put that paper number in your point-by-point review. The second point is show gratitude. Even though some comments might not be applicable, might not make any sense to you, or you're not going to follow through with that. Most editors and reviewers are volunteers. They don't make any money to do that. So they are giving their time to review your paper and to possibly make it better. So show your gratitude, be thankful for their work. And then you're gonna address each comment of each reviewer separately, or explain why you're addressing them together. So let's say two of the reviewers, they indicated that your title is not clear enough. You can address those two comments together. Although I'm going to be honest, as a reviewer, I prefer that they are separate. Even if it's just a copy and paste of the same answer, because as I said, some reviewers would just go to their section and check if the authors made what they asked, right? If they don't have time. And here we have an example of a point-by-point response. So we have the answers for reviewer 1, all the major comments, and then the answers for each of those comments with the extracts of the manuscript, indicating clearly the lines in what you modified in the manuscript to make sure you were corresponding to their questions or comments. And yeah, it's very well organized. You have the lines here, everything's in place. So for the extra tips, the first one, Davi comment on this. Try to work on multiple projects. Of course, there's a limit. We all have families. We all need to have resting time. But it's important that you're not sitting on just one paper and waiting on the paper. It makes you really frustrated to wait. Your professor might need 1 month or 2 months to go through your paper. So make sure you're doing multiple things. And the second one is a little bit of a controversial thing. A lot of people say that they want to publish when it's actually a contribution. And I agree with that in a sense, of course. But I'm going to be completely honest, your first paper is not going to be perfect. And you are going to look back to it and think, oh my God, it could be much better. And this is part of the process. This is part of evolving as a student, as a researcher, right? So try to do the best you can. But the review process will also help you to improve your paper. Make sure you have help. If you can, some fields of study, they just publish by themselves. But in our field, it's not very common at all. Typically, people would have at least 2 co-authors. So if you can have 2 people to look into your paper, it's a great help for any publication. The fourth one is, don't forget ethics. Don't forget that the name order, sharing of responsibilities, results acquisition, and sharing the results and everything, it needs to be done in an ethical way. And I can also share a link for ethics course. It's a very good course. I just took it. And it's very important. And the last one is, be kind to yourself. This is a process. It takes time to publish. It takes time to do something that you are going to be proud of. And sometimes we often try to compare ourselves with other students, but you have your own path in graduate student life. So try to be kind to yourself. And this is our course. You can scan and check out our literature course. I'm going to share some resources in the chat box as well.
And thank you very much for joining us today, or if you're watching this in the future. I hope that presentation was useful, and you can always reach out to us in our social media or through our email, and I'm gonna display to you here. This is our way that you can reach out to us, and we'll be happy to answer all of your questions.